Alright everyone, it's humor time with the people for the ethical treatment of animals. Now, sort of disclaimer here. I'm not a fan of PETA. Some of their methodologies suck ass. Like when they let, captive animals go only to starve to death in the wild. It's like, hey, we're gonna let these what was it that one time? I think they had a bunch of weasels at a weasel farm they let loose, and it's like, they've never known the wild. They're not gonna survive very long, and you're flooding the area with too much density. You're probably gonna get a disease. People are pointing this out, and it's like, I don't like fur farms, and I don't like puppy mills and shit like that. People should eat less meat. Preferably you have humane farming when possible. But people for the ethical treatment of animals, they're sort of, I remember back, I think it was in the late 90s, they had a campaign against dairy milk. And they did that here in Vermont. And they did it for attention, because don't tell Vermonters that dairy is a bad thing, because this is definitely a dairy state. We have quite a large local dairy movement here, and they had like the got milk signs and stuff. They had to let PETA into the into the schools to talk to the kids, and I can remember the kids in one elementary school, they were like chanting soy milk sucks and stuff like that, which by the way is mostly true. Rice milk's okay. Never tried almond milk, never tried any of the other weird substitutes. Soy milk is kind of bad. It's got a weird slimy flavor, if that makes any sense. Sort of if you've had soybeans before, it sort of has that weird aftertaste to it. I don't like it very much. When I was high, I would drink it a couple times. When I was at UVM, that's about all. I avoid the soy products when possible now over, maybe estrogen concerns. But PETA is worried about Nazi milk. That's their new thing. They're terrified that Nazis are guzzling milk. And this actually comes, the story from the New York Times. This is what they originally posted on the 18th. So that makes it twice as funny, because the New York Times supposedly, it's like, we are the ultimate authority in news, and it's like, actually, no, most of what you say is fucking, totally ridiculous, totally fake. At the very least, it's lies by omission and half-truths and fucking spin and bias as far as the eye can see. That's basically what the New York Times represents. The original posting is basically, though, about how lactose intolerance is being used by white supremacists, and they talk about, you're not white if you can't, guzzle a half a gallon of milk and stuff. That is mostly a joke. Like, that's separate from the 4chan joke about just chugging milk in general. It's semi-separate. Sometimes you will see people seriously bring up that topic if you're, politically incorrect or whatever. But it's not common. I don't think that many people seriously believe that it's impossible to be Caucasian and not be able to choke down yogurt, because, of course, that's not the case. There is no co-opting of science by evil racists that are studying lactose intolerance. I guess the idea is they're trying to throw shade on, any study that shows things that they find socially unacceptable. Oh, the Nazis are the ones doing that. We can ignore the study even if it's peer-reviewed or whatever. That's basically what they try to do within academia these days. But then they reposted it after getting told by hundreds of people, this is wrong, this isn't actually true. They reposted a second time on the 22nd a couple days ago, and they're like, oh well, Nazis are guzzling milk for white supremacy. And it's like, you've took the bait. You've been taken in, this is the same thing as hey, this means white power. No, it doesn't. It's the okay sign, it's a universal sign of that. Obama used that sign, he's definitely the next Grand Dragon. It was a joke, primarily. And the original purpose of these jokes is to basically shame the legacy media. The original intent is, hey, we're going to say that something represents white supremacy. Fucking light bulbs represent it. This historical... Martin Luther King represents white supremacy now because he was kind of a Republican, so we're going to appropriate Martin Luther King. The idea is to see how crazy a claim you can make, and the legacy media will still report on it as though it was true, even if it only appears on an anonymous fucking forum somewhere. They don't even know who's making the claim. The idea is to see just how stupid they really are, just how incredulous they can be with regards to claims on the internet. It's very, very funny. Because these are the same people who are like, oh, don't take anything you see on the internet seriously. Like that, like they were the boring parents telling you that 10 years ago. Now they're like, oh yeah, by the way, I saw that John D. Rockefeller is cryogenically frozen in a UFO under Walt Disney's basement or something. And they fucking believe these things. It's very funny. Trump is actually a fascist. Yes, the president of the United States is controlled by a foreign state. It's like all of these claims are dumb. There's no evidence for any of them. In most cases, they're jokes, or they've been concocted, or they've been pushed by people for the lulls in some way. The New York Times fucking writes about it. The People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, this is an example of an opportunistic group that is seeking to use something that originally is a joke, and it's been sort of fudged around until that's no longer capable of being, I guess, determined by these people. They're not intelligent enough to do any fact-checking. This is an example of opportunists attempting and failing to use something to enforce their political beliefs. Because the PETA is basically a political group when you really think about it at this point. They sort of boil down to a dichotomous approach with regards to these various issues that they cover. They do some good environmental work, but it's kind of like Greenpeace, and then for every time that they're like, save the trees, maybe they're throwing like fake blood on somebody because they're wearing fur and ruining their property, or assaulting someone or destroying property on a farm. And it's a real problem. In some cases, it boils down to literal eco-terrorism. You think of ELF or some of these groups. I think there's a counterpart to ELF, if I remember correctly. It was ALF, like literally, I think. So PETA doesn't know what it's talking about. You need to do some fact-checking, definitely. Before you post anything by the New York Times, this goes out to anyone listening here, always archive it and probably fact-check it against 5 or 6 other sites, because the New York Times is one of the least trustworthy at this point. Like in a half century, they've gone from, household name, well-trusted, generally well-liked, less political maybe than some groups, to being one of the most overtly wrong and political groups you can think of. And they are dying out. They were crowing about their increased circulation. I was sitting there laughing. I'm like, yes, I'm sure everyone who buys a copy of the New York Times supports you and will continue to buy it as the age of social media progresses. I'm sure that will happen. I'm sure that you'll remain above water, no problems. And then PETA's like, oh, yeah, we'll take the New York Times seriously. I'm sure that you would, because you're stupid. Yeah, and you have to be at this point. That's about all. Peace out.